everybody, and welcome to Taking Control, the ADHD podcast on rashpixel.fm. I'm Pete Wright, and right over there is Nikki Kinzer.
Here I am. Hello.
Hi, Nikki Kinzer.
Hi, Pete Wright. How are you?
Happy day. I'm good.
Me too.
A little tired. It's an early Monday. It's a holiday for some
for
people.
most people.
I can't tell anymore on these holidays. Like, is it appropriate to work? Is it appropriate not to work? I don't know anymore. My kids are home. That feels like I should support that. But I'm getting emails.
Well, you know what I did is I tried to make my kids feel bad for me. And I'm like, yeah, you guys all get to sleep in and I have to work tomorrow. And then I'm like, and when I'm working, you all better be quiet.
That's right.
So, yeah, no, I got no sympathy at all. So
you try for the Monday morning shame and
didn't work.
You hope it squeaks by. Well, I am. So we are here. We're doing our thing. I'm excited about it. We're going to talk about flow state and ADHD.
I'm excited about this. I was looking at the notes because this is your show today. You're the leader.
We'll see how I do.
And I think you're going to do a good job. I'm really excited about the topic.
Well, I'm excited about it too. I've been percolating on it a lot, and luckily,
that's a nice
I'm not
word.
alone.
Percolating. Yeah.
Stewing, percolating, festering.
It's good.
No. Moving the wrong direction. Anyway, before we jump in to flow state, you can head over to Take Control ADHD. You can get to know us a little bit better. Listen to the show right there on the website or subscribe to our mailing list and we'll send you an email every time a new episode is released. And of course, you can connect with us on Twitter or Facebook at Take Control ADHD. There we go. Now, we open with a question. We have a question. Wow. This question, if I cannot imagine a better person suited to address this question than you.
Well, thank you, I think. First of all, before I answer the question, I do want to say that I think it's great when listeners come, email us and actually come to us with these questions. And so I really encourage people to do it more because it's a nice way to open the show with a question from a listener and may have absolutely nothing to do with our topic. But I think it's great that we're touching you and making sure that we're, getting the information out that you need. So I just want to say that, out loud.
I love that.
Yeah. So you're such a better reader than me. So I'm going to have you actually read the question and then I'm going to answer it.
All right. Well, I'll do my best.
Okay.
Here we go. My name is Jen, and I am a fellow Portland resident. I'm 38 years old and was diagnosed with ADHD 10 years ago. I first want to say that I'm a longtime listener of the podcast. I love you guys so much. You really have given me a lot of hope with all of your wonderful suggestions and positive dispositions. Oh, thank you so much, Jen. That's really kind.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm getting ready to face a major life challenge that I've never dealt with before, and I wondered if you had any advice. My husband was recently diagnosed with leukemia and has to begin cancer treatment in 2 weeks. The last month has been a whirlwind of doctor's visits and tests, and to add to the mix, he's being enrolled in a clinical trial, so that just makes things all the more chaotic. I'm already drowning in paperwork, and we haven't even started the actual treatments yet. Do you have any suggestions for me on how to best manage the influx of doctor visits, paperwork, etc., so that I can try to keep things straight and keep calm in such a crazy and emotionally charged environment? Thanks so much for all you do, Jen.
First of all, I want to say that I'm really sorry to hear about her husband because that is devastating news for sure. And, I think the reason that Pete had said, well, I would be a good person to answer this is because my husband has MS, multiple sclerosis. He was diagnosed a month after our wedding in 2001. And so we have certainly dealt with lots of doctor visits, hip replacements, all kinds of stuff. Lots of MRIs, all kinds of stuff, right, that comes with MS and disability.
And because you've been married for how long now?
Almost 18 years.
18 years.
Mm-hmm.
So 18 years minus 2 weeks.
Right.
You've been dealing with this.
Yeah. And there's definitely times where there's more paperwork than others. And he also went on disability. So when he went on disability, there was a lot of paperwork with that and a lot of unknowns. So I do have that in common. They're two different situations. but both just, both situations are very emotionally charged. And so one of the things that before I even talk to you about paperwork, Jen, I would want to say, just make sure that you have a support system, not only for your husband, but also for yourself. Because this will be very difficult. This is going to be a hard process to go through. And I think that one of the things that I found in my own experience is that you feel very powerless because there's just nothing you can do to help your spouse. And you see them hurting and you see them going through all of this, and it's just really hard. So, I ask that you do, get your own support system and take care of you. And when you talk about keeping calm, that's the only way that you can really do it, is making sure that you have that self-care in place. So with that being said, the paperwork, I'm going to share with you what we did and what we kind of continue to do, basically in the midst of all of it. And this was especially when he was going out on disability, because we had to get everything together. I basically took all of the paperwork, all of the bills, all of the doctor's notes, everything, and put them on our living room floor. Had everything out on the living room floor. And then what we did together is we started separating them into categories. And so we would have Post-it notes on where certain categories went. So we would just go through the paperwork. If this was a doctor, if this was notes from a specific doctor, it went into that category. But each doctor, because he had different doctors, had their own category. So we didn't mix and match the doctors. With that doctor, that's where the appointment notes went. That's where if we had questions, we'd jot that down and put that there. They give you summaries, of what the appointment was and what they found or whatever. We do that in that category. Insurance was a whole different category, which is, oh man, that's hard. But I'm going to get to that in just a second. But definitely have insurance in a different category. And then have a separate place for your bills, because bills are going to come in and they're going to be confusing. And you're going to wonder, is this covered? Is it not covered? Because sometimes it says it's a bill. And then sometimes there's this big thing that says this is not a bill. Then you're like, okay, then what is it? So you want to put those things aside. And I would say when you're getting your mail, you actually probably want a separate basket or something separate for you to put those bills aside so that you don't lose them. We had a timeline. We had to go through and do a timeline of his symptoms and what, how he was diagnosed and all of this stuff. So we had to spend some time doing that. Anything that you think is important related to the doctor's appointments, you want to keep together. And this is really what the point is that we want to have a place for the paper to go to that's all in one spot. So once you get the backlog categorized and organized, then you got to figure out where you're going to hold it. We started with a binder. And this was great at first, right? Because for that backlog that was all over the living room, we were able to hole punch it and put a file folder, in the binder and everything. But that is not an easy thing to maintain. Right.
No, you have to hole punch every time you get a new bill, and that happens a lot.
Yes. So what we ended up doing is we kept that binder as kind of the beginning of his journey. And then what we ended up doing is just having separate file folders in a filing cabinet that anything that came in that's where I dropped it. But you could use a handheld filing case that's just for your husband's paperwork. You could use a section like in your filing cabinet. But the thing you want to remember is you just want to keep it separate from everything else and have one place for it to go, so that when you have to go back and look at it, then you have a place to do that. And you're not looking, it's not scattered basically all over the place.
Well, and I imagine it can be very frustrating when you start accidentally mixing bills that are not related to, like procedures, like, the cable bill. Well, you don't want that in the binder.
Right. That's exactly true. Because the thing with medical bills too is that, they'll work out payment plans for you too. So if you get this really large bill and you can't afford all of it at once, call them and find out what kind of payment plans you can do or what you can work out, because then it doesn't screw up your credit. You're not getting these credit notices or anything because you are really working with them. You're making an effort. Now, when it comes to insurance, I was lucky because I have a mother who spent her whole work life in the insurance industry. So she was able to kind of... Are you
serious? I don't think I knew that. That is an ace in the hole.
Yeah. So she really helped me kind of, go through it and really understand what was being covered and what wasn't. If you find somebody that can help you, that's great. I mean, I had my mom, but I would even ask, call the insurance company and ask for somebody to walk you through this, because it really does get confusing. There is
like to act as an advocate, right, on your behalf.
Yeah, because this is the thing. Doctors and insurance, they both screw up. And so you want to make sure that you're not being overcharged anything.
What?
Yes.
I am shocked.
It's crazy.
Shocked, Nikki.
Yes. So it's really important when you're looking at all of this, cash that could potentially be going out, that it's the right amount, right? So you definitely want to double check because, they make mistakes. This is the other kind of just a couple of things that I wanted to share with Jen and anybody else that's going through this type of situation. It really helps if you can have somebody else attend the major appointments with you. So not only her and her husband, but somebody else too. So there were many times where we had either my husband's dad or one of my parents, we always, not all the time because it wasn't always possible, but when we could, we would have somebody else come to the major appointments because it is so emotional and you don't hear everything. You don't understand everything. And so when you've got somebody else in there that can kind of ask the questions that maybe you're thinking, but you don't think about them until later, it can really help. So getting, and if you don't know, ask, you're your advocate here. So you got to keep asking. The other thing I would want to mention is that I avoid going back to that binder. I don't want to see it. I don't want to read it. I don't want anything to do with it because it is so hard to read. It is such a painful experience that I don't want to remember it. And I know that maybe that's just me living in denial, but you got to put it together. We had to because of disability reasons. But I don't go back to it. I don't want that. My husband's doing good right now. And that's what I want to remember. I was wondering
if that was sort of a part of your journey and for Jen and anybody else going through this, like at what point do you simply have to find, for lack of a better word, a dissociative state? Right. So you have to find a way to take your sort of emotional, presence out of it just so you can, face the dragon that is all of the paperwork and the insurance and all that.
Well, and that's where having somebody do it with you really helps.
Yeah.
I think that, having my mom do it with me and if I remember right, I even think my mother-in-law helped me a little bit too. But just having somebody else be able to see it and go through it is just really helpful. So if she has a friend, a sister, somebody that she could, rely on to, and it doesn't have to be every single time you organize the paperwork, but just maybe like right now when you're trying to get everything together and get everything set up. It's, you can never take the emotion out completely. So it's, and that's why I can't go back and read it. I just can't. It's just heartbreaking. And,
right. Especially now, as you said, now that you're at a place where, things are okay. Right now. So, okay.
So there you go.
I hope that helps, Jen. Again, as Nikki said, thank you so much for writing and for trusting us to give you a little bit of insight. I hope that helps. And thank you, Nikki, for, as always, I know this is a subject that requires a great deal of vulnerability on your part to talk about and be present with. So thank you for that.
You bet.
The ADHD podcast is brought to you by you people. It is brought to you by you. The reason we can do this show week to week, year after year, is thanks to the support of you, our listeners, at patreon.com/the ADHD podcast. Your direct support pays for hosting the show and equipment. But you know what? It helps put food on our very tables. If this show has ever touched you or helped you make a change in your life for the better, if you've ever found that you understand your relationship with ADHD in a new way, please support the ADHD podcast directly through patreon.com/the ADHD podcast. You are what makes listener-supported podcasting like ours work. With a few dollars a month, you can help guarantee that we continue to grow the show, add new features, and invest more heavily in our community. Get started at patreon.com/the ADHD podcast today. Can we talk about hyperfocus, Nikki Kinzer?
Of course.
I'd like to.
It's part of ADHD, isn't it?
I've been really, as I said at the beginning, I've been stewing, I've been percolating, festering on this idea of hyperfocus. And because it's a thing that, we hear it talked about as even, as the superhero kind of power. We hear it talked about. I know I have used that language in the past, and I've really tried over the years to evolve the way I talk about it, not as a superpower, because as a superpower, hyperfocus is disgustingly unreliable. Right?
That's a really good point. It really is. You don't really get to choose it.
You don't get to choose it. You don't get to choose it, and it's just awful in that regard. I feel so empowered and so strong after I am able to come out of a session. I'm exhausted and I'm hungry and dehydrated, and it's been hours since I've thought about anything else but the thing I'm working on, and I've finished it and I'm feeling great. And then I realized what I was doing is ridiculously of great low utility to my life. I was not able to, I've been organizing a binder or something that I don't even use. I've been labeling things for hours and things that I already understood. It's those kinds of dumb projects that I'll get soaked into and not be able to get myself out of because of this debilitating state of, quote, superpower hyperfocus. And it just doesn't work enough of the time consistently to be on par with flight or laser vision,
Yeah.
I want it to be the power of flight, and it is not the power of flight. So I've been thinking a lot about it, and so I started
percolating
as it happened.
Percolating. Have you been percolating? Okay.
I've been percolating, and as it happens, this book crosses my desk, and it's a book that I've been exposed to years ago by a wonderful physician who is also an OmniFocus guru, who wrote this book called "Creating Flow with OmniFocus," and that has nothing to do with what I want to talk about today. So I'm not going to go into that, but the word just stuck to me, right? This idea of creating flow with ADHD, right? That's the experience that I want to have more often in my focus sessions, right? I want to feel like it is a source of energy that I can engage and disengage from with greater fluidity. How do I do that? Has anybody done any research on that experience? And so I began to dig, Nikki Kinzer. I began to dig.
And what did you find?
Well, this is great. It turns out I am not alone. We are not alone. Hallelujah. That in fact, many have been writing on this subject and trying to figure it out. There are entire wings at university medical centers that are studying hyperfocus. I don't know about wings. That may be a little bit generous, but I have some names to attribute to it. So the first thing we have to understand is that ADHDers, it's not always distraction that we're dealing with, right? And I really like the way we pivot this characterization of distraction from not just that we're not present here, but that we are actively present somewhere else in our heads, right? It is diversion, not distraction.
And it's usually something that you're more interested in. So there's the component of what you're what piques your interest.
Yes. That's right. Something is piquing your interest that is not in tune with what you are supposed to be focusing on. And I say, again, supposed to be with quotes, because who knows if you're supposed to be focusing on that. So what is at the other end of this distraction? That is the big question for us, and to figure out how we can sort of change the way we look at distraction to diversion, and can we find a way to focus that? It's like, a magnifying glass under the sun. Can we focus that into a point and go after some anthills like I did when I was 9? That's awful. What an awful thing children do. Thankfully, I found this fellow named Leon Tsao, who was a graduate student, and he wrote his thesis on this very topic for his master's program. And I read that thesis because hyperfocus.
Right. You were very into this research.
Found some great, I found some great resources. So first, let's talk about what a flow state is.
Yes.
When I use the word flow state, what does that conjure up for you?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that question, because I wanted to read the definition to see if I was getting it right. Because you know how sometimes there's that expression of I'm in the flow of it, or, it's
I'm in the zone.
I'm in the
hear
zone.
That all the time. I'm really
and
in
we
the zone.
also, I just used this word, I think yesterday or maybe last week, workflow. I was talking about workflow. What is what are the steps that you're taking to you get this information, and now what? What's the next step? So that's kind of how I see it. But I don't know.
Well,
Tell
I
us.
love that you use that, because really workflow it's a great word to describe what it does, and I don't think enough of us really stop and focus on what that means. And it's a great lead-in to this conversation about flow with ADHD, because workflow, in its purest sense, is a documentation of the steps to accomplish a task, right, with the least amount of friction in accomplishing that task.
That's exactly how I would define it. And what I want for myself and for my clients and for my listeners.
That's right. Now, see, the problem is most of us think about workflow in terms of just the steps part. We stop at the point of friction, right? We just say, can you just document that workflow of how you do this thing and get it to do that thing, or how you get that TPS report filled out by everybody and all the steps that it takes to do that thing? That's a workflow. But what if you wanted to really make a successful workflow, you have to stop and say, where is friction introduced into this process, and how can we make it easier to accomplish the task?
Right, which is so important for the ADHD world, because as soon as you hit friction, you're going to give up on it, or you're going to get mad at it, or mad at yourself. I mean, there's so many things that can happen. So making it work and getting rid of that friction, right? Making it easier somehow, or simpler.
Well, and that's it. I've been another thing I've been kind of percolating on, I think that feeds into this, is something we talked about in the ADHD book club several weeks back. And that is, can I, or maybe it was a book club, I don't know. It was one of the Discord things, how can I get this thing done fast enough that I'm not distracted by something else in the process, right? I have something I need to accomplish. Can I do it fast enough, efficiently enough, frictionless enough that I can get it done and finish it before I'm distracted by something else? It's the race to accomplish what's in front of you. And I think about that all the time right now, that, is what I'm doing, am I going to successfully accomplish this thing before my brain takes me off and, oh no, it just did. There's that feeling of like you just, it was email challenge week 3. Thank you, Melissa, sitting in the chat room, auditing me. Yes, it was the email challenge week 3. And that's exactly what we want to accomplish with this. So let's back to this flow state. From a psychological perspective, this definition I think I'm about to read is really nice. And it was written extensively about in an article in the Handbook of Positive Psychology in 1990. The doctor who led this particular article, his name is Mehi Csikszentmihalyi. And here's what he had to say about it. A psychological state of mind in which an individual becomes fully immersed in an activity with a single-minded, focused involvement and intrinsic motivation. This experience is accompanied by a feeling of joy in which one feels at one with an activity. Psychologists consider flow to be a healthy, positive experience that is beneficial to psychological well-being. Now I ask, my ADHDers listening to this, when's the last time you felt like your hyperfocus was a healthy, positive experience that is beneficial to your psychological well-being?
And feeling of joy.
Does it spark joy?
Does it spark joy?
Does it spark joy? Is your joy sparked? I am all up in Marie Kondo right now.
A lot of people
Don't even
are.
get me started.
That might be the show next week. Who knows? Yeah.
Who knows? So that's
right.
that's a challenge. And so if we in terms of definition of terms, let's just say hyperfocus. Though ADHD individuals can be attention shifting, inattentive, and distractive, they also display a paradoxical trait of intense mental focus on a narrow area or of interest or activity. Right, a narrow area of interest or activity. This is a paradoxical trait. That is an absolutely paradoxical trait. It is the curse of ADHD, this paradox. So as it turns out here, as more people are talking about this. Here's a gentleman named Brandon Ashenoff, who's a psychologist at University of Birmingham, who actually studies hyperfocus extensively. And he writes that it makes for this interesting paradox. It's too much focus as opposed to scattered attention span. You're focused so intently on something that no other information gets into your brain, right? And in the process, another doctor I read as a process in digesting this research, who said it's like being pulled out of a dreamscape, right? When you're trying to get somebody's attention who's in a hyperfocus state, it's not that they don't they're not acknowledging you intentionally. Your words are not getting into their brain because of this dream state, and that is that's a really important thing to remember, I think, about yourself and about being with others who are living in a hyperfocus state. Like it is a fugue state, right? You have to, it's jarring context shift to get out of it. So the difference between these two concepts, right, this focus flow state and hyperfocus, is really important. Meerte van der Lugt writes that hyperfocus seems to me more like a mindless behavior, often without any real goal or useful results. It's rewarding because it feels like flow. Yet the sensation seems more obsessive-compulsive. The purpose, the experience, and the outcome are different. It is disengaged from a target, from an objective. So what do you see when you work with people, Nikki? Does this stuff resonate?
Oh, yes, of course. I mean, I think that this is, it's a huge part of the challenges of ADHD. And a lot of what I hear is people wanting to get out of hyperfocus. They know that they're in it. They see it. They see that they're avoiding something else and getting, sort of just taken up by something that maybe, like you said earlier, has nothing to do with anything. What I think is really interesting is when you said you're focused so intently on something, no other information gets into your brain. I think of my college students. I work with a lot of college students, and I'm wondering, when I hear that or when I read that, I think, gosh, that's probably how they feel in class, right? Yes. They know that they're supposed to get a concept, and so they're trying to get that concept into their notes or whatever, but they're so focused on that they're forgetting everything that's coming behind that statement. Especially because information is flowing so quickly. So fast. Yeah.
And if some other conditions aren't met in that hyperfocus state, for example, which we'll talk about in a minute, there are conditions that, if they are not met, make it even harder for you to channel a flow state or to find a flow state, and constantly feel like you're just struggling to tread water, like you just can't keep up. The challenge is that we have to find a way to come up with or build a muscle around harnessing the appropriate sort of attention for the task that we're trying to accomplish, right? And I think appropriateness of attention is an interesting way to talk about it. As it happens, our dear friend, Dr. Mehi Csikszentmihalyi, actually wrote this book called Flow back in the 90s. And what he says, I think, is really interesting. Again, we're looking 30-year-old information. He says that inattention disorders do not bear any relationship to flow state because a flow state requires attention. Well, yes, but is he then locking the door to this discussion of a pivoted or a diversionary kind of hyperfocus? Does it mean that if you have ADHD, you'll never experience this positive sort of flow? That's a 30-year-old assertion, and I wonder if the literature can catch us up on this concept. Again, thankfully, it sort of does.
Good.
So a later study found that nearly 30% of highly creative adolescents reported elevated ADHD symptoms elsewhere, but were found to have self-reported achieving the same flow state in areas and projects of great interest. Okay. Interest is the first important element. We all know the perils of interest. If you're not interested in mowing the lawn, you get out the mower, you do a few stripes, right? A few passes, and then suddenly your wife comes out and she's looking at the lawn and it looks like, you've just shaved a bald strip right down the middle and you've left the mower running and you're off doing something else like playing basketball. That's the sort of, that's what's in my head.
Because that's what you've done?
That's what I don't want to talk about.
Is that a personal experience?
Stop.
Okay.
Stop probing.
Sorry.
This is not no, off the rails.
All right.
I regret that.
Sorry.
So I'm just saying that
if that was to happen,
interest is an important element.
Right.
When distractibility sort of rears its head, when it comes with a level of skill for the task is not high enough to meet the expectations of the project, right? That's the second thing, is this, that your skill level is not high enough to meet the expectations of your project. So I think about your students again, who don't yet have the skills that they're trying to acquire, and therefore they have this sense of their head about what they want to accomplish, but they can't accomplish it yet because they're not skilled enough to do it. Therefore, fractured attention, right? If you have this vision of what you want to accomplish, but you don't know how to get there, non-ADHDers will create crappy but finished work, right? Mm-hmm. They get the experience of having gone through the motions. ADHDers get this sort of fractured attentive state and don't even finish the work. They don't get the valuable experience of practice that non-ADHDers do. And that's another really important thing to think about. And don't forget time. As soon as you insert a time pressure into a project, anxiety increases, and thus attentive fracture, right? Happens again. So all of these things sort of are in this giant stew of, what does it mean to hit this flow state? And I think that our friend, Dr. Csikszentmihalyi, came up with a model or a matrix that I really like. And I've been thinking about it for a couple of days, and I just want to talk through it here and see if it resonates with you and resonates with our listeners, and see if we can come up with something that might help us as like a model to think through how we can build a muscle to achieve flow state. What are the things that go into this? So this matrix I'm going to describe, and I will also put a link to it in the show notes that comes from his book, Flow. If you imagine on the vertical axis, we have challenge, right? If we're drawing like a matrix, like a graph. So on the vertical axis, we have challenge, like the degree of challenge, low challenge to high challenge. And on the horizontal axis, we have skill, right? What is our skill level to accomplishing the task? Low skill to high skill. And in this model, there are 8 areas in the model. It's not a perfect grid, so that makes it a little bit hard. So imagine a pie that's just sort of laid on top of this. And if we're at the low challenge, low skill vector, that leads to an emotional response of apathy, right? We're completely apathetic to what we don't know how to do it, and it's really hard, and it's not very hard. We don't know how to do it, and it's not very challenging to us. We're apathetic to it. We just don't want to do it. We're distracted. We move on. Moving, let's move to the right. If it's a medium skill but low challenge, then it becomes a task of boredom, right? That's according to the model, it's a boring task. If it is a high skill task but low challenge, then it becomes a relaxing task, right? It's something you are well equipped to accomplish, and it's not very hard to do. Then it becomes a thing that you can start thinking about hyperfocus, right? I can do this. I can label the hell out of stuff all day long, right? I know how to do that. I have all the equipment, and I have I have everything I need. As we move up, if it's a medium challenge and a high skill, that becomes a control, right? Something that we can control. It's something that's starting to engage our interest and in a more positive way, but we're not quite at that flow state yet. So moving up, if it is a low skill medium challenge, now we introduce worry. Right. Now we're in the anxiety zone because now I don't have the skill to accomplish what I need to do, but it's kind of hard to do it. And I know I need to do this thing. I'm worried about the outcome, the potential outcome. If it is a high challenge, low skill, I'm poorly equipped to handle this. I shouldn't be handling it at all. I don't have the skills and it's really hard to do. We're in anxiety zone. That is an anxiety response. If it is a medium challenge and a medium skill, that's in the arousal zone. I like that.
Right.
The arousal zone.
So you can...
I'm getting excited about
You're
my task.
You're going to do that task. You're going to get it done.
Now, if you take the arousal zone and the control zone, right? I now have the skills that I need to accomplish the task. And it is a challenging enough task to engage my interest. That is the thing that allows us to get into the flow state. That's the final state on this matrix, is the flow state. It's high skill, meaning we are actually equipped to do this thing. And it is interesting enough and challenging enough for us to accomplish it. I think that is that's a really interesting thing to think about because what it allows us to do is build a set of contingent requirements to reach this flow state. If you understand what it takes to find a flow state, even it is an understanding of finding a flow state neurotypically, at least it's possible to build a model that can help you turn hyperfocus into flow state more intentionally. I say maybe with a question mark, right? Is it possible to do this? So number one, do you have the tools required to meet the project expectations? Do you have what it takes to do it, to actually accomplish what it is in your head that you want to accomplish? Number two, do you have the skills required to meet the project expectations, right? Have you been trained to do what it is that you want to accomplish? Number three, do you have the interest required to meet the project expectations? And number four, do you have the time required to meet the project expectations? The tools, the skill, the interest, and the time. If you don't have one of those things and you're going into something that you want to accomplish, what happens, right?
It doesn't get done.
Fractured attention. We have ADHD, right? So the answer to these four things at any given time, all being yes, that's probably
pretty
never
unlikely.
Gonna happen. It's very unlikely to happen. But I had never stepped back and looked at the contingent requirements of me finding a state of finding the zone, right? I can now go back to projects that have been troublesome to me. And I can say to myself, what was I missing to get that done? Right? I didn't have the tools to make it easy enough to get this done. I didn't have the skill. I should have actually gone and trained up in a specific area before I went in and tried to accomplish this particular thing. I was just not interested in it. Well, just knowing that is a powerful thing, right? Knowing that before you have to accomplish or take a test or before you have to get into a class, it says, I'm not interested in this generally. What do I need to do to make myself interested in it? If you're a student at a university, maybe you need to talk to the professor and say, look, I live with ADHD. I am not interested in this topic, and that's a recipe for disaster for me. What can we do? How can you help me, right, to find a practical, experience with this that I just need to help me engage with it in a way that's going to keep me interested. That's a conversation you can have when you have a sense of what it takes to find a flow state. So I present all of this. It's kind of like the whole margin discussion that we had months ago, right? I don't know that there's an answer, but the research is out there that says these are the four things that we need to actually be thinking about. We need to be conscious of the tools, the skill, the interest, and the time. And I've never looked at them from the perspective of how we approach channeling our hyperfocus successfully. And I'm very interested in figuring out, is this a practice that we can build? Is this a mindfulness, a self-care practice that we can build upon?
I have so much to say. It's so positive. I love it. And I think that these four questions, I assume that are you going to put those in the show notes as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, because I think that what happens to a lot of my clients is they just assume that they can't get into that flow for whatever reason. And they don't know why. They just think that they can't, right? That it's just not going to happen. But what I think happens here is when you go back and you answer these questions, it gives you at least a starting point of thinking how you can break through that limiting belief that you can't do something and try to figure out, what is missing and how do I get that so that I can get into this, flow state. So I really love the awareness piece of this. I think these questions are really good to get you started on finding out where the cracks are and, how you can fill those up to get into that flow. The other thing that I think is important that I see is that, we're practicing skills. So you may not be efficient in this skill or an expert in this skill, but you're practicing it. And I think even just knowing that, there may be some worry to that. There may be some anxiety to that. But again, being aware that you're in an uncomfortable zone because you're not as experienced as you want to be, but you're gaining that experience right now. And so, the more you gain it, the better, the more confident you're going to feel later on. So I think it's a great awareness tool of kind of where you fall. Where are you on this subject or this project?
Absolutely. And I would be very interested as people start to think about this and engage in it. I'd be very interested in sort of where the holes are for ADHD, right? I mean, because so much of this was written and discussed around, a flow state toward, neurotypical processing and creativity. Well, we're also striving to be able to hit a flow state of creativity, right? That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to engage this internal sort of core resource of creative problem solving to accomplish whatever task is in front of us, whether it is actually I have to label all these boxes or whether I have to, do all the pre-pro to launch a new podcast or to, build a new widget, whatever it is, you're trying to engage a creative resource. And so I think it is fascinating to see that there are so many who are actually trying to do this as well. And in my effort to distill down these 4 elements, I'm absolutely open to things I may have missed, and so I would love to hear. Jump in the Discord and share your thoughts or process. What's missing? How can we make it better? Because I'm interested in a potential model that helps us engage an ADHD flow state positively. Can we get good at this? I think we can. I think it's possible to do it. And there is a whole angle that I should at least say almost dismissively as a footnote that they've done some work, particularly on the role of medication in finding this kind of in hyperfocus, right? What does it actually do to help you engage? What does it blunt in the process? Sometimes you need a little zip, zip, zip. I need to be able to engage that part of me and not not stop and step out of, that flow of energy that can come from ADHD if you have all the other pieces in place. There you go. That's what I've got.
I love it. Great job,
thank you,
Pete.
Kinzer. I hope that's
good information.
Useful for folks. And please, definitely share your thoughts. Happy sort of holiday here in the U.S., but not really,
because it'll be a week later.
That's right, but not really, because we're a week late. Anyway, happy Tuesday. We'll say that. Every Tuesday could be a holiday with that mindset. Thank you, everybody.
That's right.
Thank you, Nikki Kinzer, and thank you, everybody, for downloading and listening to this show. We absolutely appreciate your time and your attention. On behalf of Nikki Kinzer, I'm Pete Wright. We'll catch you next week right here on Taking Control, the ADHD podcast.